Welcome to Athletic Wise, where like-minded people come to connect. We focus on sports science, in particular, how we can apply this knowledge to the sports we love. In today's edition of the High Performance Speaker Series, we will be discussing some neural facets of high-intensity training. From morphology to psychology, neuroscience plays an instrumental role in sports performance. Today's guest in the High Performance Speaker Series is Dr. Patrick Vellner. Pat is a chiropractor in Nanaimo, BC. Pat is arguably one of the fittest all-around athletes in the world. For the past several years, Pat has been one of the top contenders in CrossFit, and he is the 2020 CrossFit Open champion. He also has a phenomenal reputation in the CrossFit community. He's a fan favorite, not solely for his tremendous grit, but equally for being such a classy competitor. We're truly grateful Pat was able to take some time to chat with us. So thanks, Pat.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Our bodies reflect what we do and don't do. Recent research has demonstrated long-term intensive gymnastics training has the potential to remodel the brain. For example, white matter structural adaptation leading to more rapid and efficient communication between neurons. Likely incognizant to the athlete, they are perhaps laying the neurological foundation for successful participation in many different sports. Do you believe your gymnastics background uniquely primed you to succeed in CrossFit?
I think in some ways, for sure. I think that there's a lot more to. I think it's a good mesh of the physical and mental skills that it takes to be successful in sports and in a lot of things. I do think, for one thing, it teaches you a really good kinematic awareness and just like biomechanical awareness. A lot of the very basic and foundational sports skills, stuff like balance, flexibility, strength, that you get a very strong foundation in that stuff, which will serve you well in anything you do. So I think that learning to be very intuitive with your body at a very young age is super beneficial, because you don't even think about it from then on. You know, when it's time to learn a new skill in any other context, whether for me, years later, I had to learn how to weightlift. And I understand bar path and movement mechanics and how to optimize those mechanics for my body type and size. And I think that you just learn how to really identify those things easily and feel the difference between a good movement and a bad movement, maybe better than someone who hasn't had that same kind of experience. But like I said, I think there's a big mental component to it as well. Like from a young age, I've trained a lot, and I think a sport like gymnastics teaches you to fall down a lot and really well. So you get maybe a little bit less deterred by failure, and you learn how to stick it out and learn how to fall a lot of times and then finally do something right. And really internalize that concept that, like failure is part of learning something, and you're never going to nail it first try. So, I think many, many years of that, as well as the physical skills that it breeds, were super helpful.
You've learned how to dust yourself off pretty quickly.
Yeah, very well, for sure.
That's great. I've used heart rate variability extensively to assess my athletes. So HRV, being vaguely mediated, elucidates the inhibitory role of the vagus nerve in regulation of allostatic load. As an example, an athlete with a low resting HRV may have an impaired ability to self-regulate the physiology and neuroendocrine systems in response to environmental and psychological or emotional stress. Do you do anything similar to monitor your system's response to various loads?
I used to wear a Whoop for a couple of years, maybe. That would give you heart rate variability readouts. I find it kind of hard for me to use that data. I know my coach used to look at that data, and I would sort of lean on her to make decisions based on that. But that was kind of while I was still studying in school and I was training a lot, and it was challenging to know what to do with the information sometimes. Like if I had a lower HRV reading for some reason, I don't necessarily know what I can change that day or that week to then rebound from that. And that's why I kind of outsourced a bit of that to rely on like my coach and other people to hopefully do that. So I stopped wearing it because I kind of found it to be a bit noisy. Like I would have all this data and I felt like I didn't have the right idea of what to do with it. So I would have needed someone like you who had better expertise in it to sort of just like sift through that and give me instructions. Because I'm very good at following instructions. But sometimes when I had schoolwork to do and training and whatever, adding an extra thing to be like, all right, how do I identify what to do with this data? I just didn't spend the time doing it. So I found that I stopped wearing it actually because, you get recovery scores and things like that. And I found that it would prime you a little bit before you would train, and it could be good or bad. If you're in the red because you've had a particularly hard week of training in school and work and whatever, all of a sudden I've got a pre-made excuse for if my training day is not so good. And I didn't really like the thought of that priming, whether it's really subconscious or not. And I had before going into competitions, waking up the day of a competition and I open my app and I'm like at 25% recovery, and it's like, what are you going to do? Like, the competition's today, whether you like it or not. So I kind of didn't like having that information. I would rather not know and put my best foot forward either way. One thing it did really do for me though is I took a lot of time to improve my sleep hygiene, because I feel like that's the one thing that you kind of can control with that information. And when, it gives you kind of sleep goals and some data and some metrics that you can analyze, and like say, all right, well, how can I improve my sleep data? That's going to then in turn improve my recovery and rebound my HRV and stuff like that. So the simple things that, most people probably know but don't do, and just, trying to black out my room and control temperature and same sleep wake hours every day and stuff like that. When you're eating, I just started to create a little bit better sleep hygiene and more structured routine that I've continued to do. And then so when I stopped using that interface, I maintained the good habits, and I feel like I just kind of got rid of the pollution that I didn't like.
No, fair enough. That's great. Okay, sounds good. So at the elite level of sport, motivation is rarely a hindrance to training at high intensities. Yet RPE is typically very indicative of the athlete's ability for positive adaptation on a particular training day. Do you allow yourself much flexibility for subjective metrics and modifying your plan at all?
Yeah, I've started to do that more. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like as I'm getting older, I need to do that. It's a little harder for me to just charge headfirst into everything all the time. And my coach has started to program a little more of that, but it's hard. I think it takes a lot of discipline to use RPEs and use them well, because it's really easy to, depending on your mood, a subjective analysis is just that, it's subjective. And if I say, that feels like 70% for today, whether it's really is or not, it doesn't matter. It's whatever I say it is, right? So I think that the risk you run into is people who are highly motivated and highly competitive at an elite level will always typically push harder than not hard, right? Like if you give me a 7 on 10 RPE, I'm more likely to do it at a 9 than I am to do it at a 6. Which then is also not good, right? That's just a lot more strain on your nervous system, on your muscles. That, if that week was meant to be a little bit less loading, and then the next week's ramping up, and I've gone and done this first week at way higher intensity than was intended, it's not good as well, right? Like there's the limit to how much you can do that, and over a long term, you'll burn out or things like that. So, or you get hurt. So I think that's a big communication component. And I talk a lot with my coach about stuff like that, about very specific goals, because sometimes, the training goal is you got to do this as hard as you can or whatever. And sometimes you're accumulating volume and the intensity is supposed to be lower, or this is more motor pattern work. It's about skill work. It's not about intensity, and really identifying those goals and just having very transparent conversations with my coach has helped me to do that better. And just to let go of the competitive nature now and then, which I train a lot by myself. And so it's a little easier to do that for me. But at the same time, if you have training partners, sometimes, you're going at 70% and then somebody kind of goes a little faster, and you don't want to get beat because you're competitive, regardless of what the goal of that training piece was. All of a sudden you end up in this race, and then you end up working much harder than was intended. So there's some traps in there. I think that it's a really, really good way to train, because it allows for better periodization. Like you're gonna be able to accumulate volume better. You're gonna be able to have better longevity, reduce rates of burnout, things like that, if you can do it really well. But it's hard to be honest with yourself and say, like, what's 7 out of 10, what's 8 out of 10. And there's a lot of different kind of versions of those Borg scales and stuff around that kind of give you basic ideas of, this is a conversational pace. This should be like a non-repeatable effort. This should be whatever. But it's hard. And that's why, you kind of just have to try your best to be honest with yourself. And I just talk with my coach a lot and say, what are we really trying to do here? And I'll try to meet those criteria and achieve that goal.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, I really think there's room for it. Definitely those subjective metrics. Absolutely. What about alignment? So alignment is critical to neural function. I would assume your clinical profession makes you more cognizant of posture, technique, etc. Along the same lines, have you tried getting adjusted right before training? And if so, have you noticed any effects?
I've done it before. I wouldn't say that I've noticed like a crazy change. I think that one of the big things as far as alignment and that sort of stuff is concerned is using really good either like activation or like postural cues or whatever they are, things that are going to allow you to then hit those technical cues or do those movement patterns the way you're meant to do, that just prime your body. And so for some people, I mean, the nature of that kind of manual therapy is that patients respond differently to different things, right? So I spent a few years working with a performance therapist who we just kind of figured out for me what was the best way to do it. What do I respond best to? If we have 10 minutes call, I got to be in the corrals, we have to go out, what are the quick touches that I should do that I will respond to quickly, and then that will convert well to performance when it comes time to compete. So whether it was like, all right, we have an overhead heavy event coming up, so we're going to do this, this, and this to set your shoulders where we need them to be, like line up your glenohumeral joints, get your T-spine ready to rock, and then like, all right, off you go. Like maybe pick 3 things that are going to work well. And so that was a really big and important patient therapist interaction and relationship where we spent a lot of time working together. And so we just knew, like, he would come on days that I would train, and we'd play with some different things and give feedback and say, hey, I liked how this felt, I didn't like how this felt. And so some of it is as simple as what you do in your activation to get those muscles primed and pull your body into the positions it needs to be. Could be manipulations, could be many different things. But yeah, stuff that just gets your body primed to do the job that you're about to do. So yeah, and it's the thing is, there's no one size fits all. Like I can't. And I think that the key to doing that really successfully is to spend the time with your therapist and have that back and forth and sample, try things, see how it works. During, obviously non-critical periods of your season or whatever you're doing, play with different things and then see what you like and what works well and what's easy and fast. And then off you go. One good thing about something like manipulations, if you're a really good positive responder to manipulations, is that they are very fast. So, there's a difference between if I've got to spend 20 minutes doing all kinds of joint congruency work to get myself ready to go, or if you can just kind of get ready, get a couple manipulations done, and then 3 minutes and you're ready to go. But yeah, I think it's so individualized that you got to take the time and work with the people who work with you.
Yeah, I think obviously your background's given you, I would think everybody has their distinct advantages, but I think that's probably definitely one for you, knowing your body, knowing your, I was going to say like kinematics, whatnot, body awareness.
I would say it helps me communicate. But I'll be the first to admit that I need to take myself out of that equation more times than not. If I have my shoulders bugging me, my hip, my back, whatever it is, I can't treat myself because I have a conflict inherent in what I'm trying to do as an athlete. I think there are periods where as an athlete, your job is to sort of tolerate certain amounts of discomfort, ignore what your body's signaling you, and just do the job that you're meant to do. And then, afterwards you can deal with whatever it is. But sometimes in the moment, you just can't be worried about it. And so the nature of my 2 jobs kind of is that they are at odds. So I need to take myself out of the equation because otherwise I can't do it. I have too much subjective bias to be objective and say, oh yeah, you need to do this. And I laugh about it. Like now we're in an off-season situation and I'm rehabbing some little things from the year, and it's hard to be patient, and it's frustrating, and there's setbacks, and like I have to laugh at all the times I tell patients certain things, and then I can't follow my own advice, right? And I need someone else to keep me honest, and I need to be accountable to that person, and then I'll do it, because again, I can follow the instructions, but it's weird. I give myself too much of a break when it's like, I'm like, you should do this, take 4 weeks off and do this. And then at 2 weeks, I'm like, I don't know. But if somebody else tells me, and then I have to show up to my next appointment and they ask like, hey, have you been doing this and this? And I have to say, oh no, you know, I cut these corners, and I feel really guilty over it. So I think that accountability to me is a really important part. And that's why, like, when it comes to my own care, I lean on a team of people, like colleagues that I have at the clinic I work at. But you just, like, I just have to do it. And I know, and it helps me communicate well with them and say this, this, and this in very specific terms are what's bothering me. And this is what I think. What do you think? But it really helps me to have that extra level and layer of accountability.
Oh, that's great. So many athletes have struggled with this, especially when they first starting out. They train maximally too often to develop neural fatigue. There's variation to the exact definition, but most researchers agree it refers to an involuntary reduction in voluntary activation. Have you noticed your resiliency to this changing at all with experience? That is the duration of your recovery window. Has that changed at all?
Oh, this is burnout. This is like what we were saying about the RPEs. Like, this is where I think over time you have to appreciate that the accumulation of training hours over years has an effect. You know, when you retrain and detrain through periods of whatever periodization, those happen faster. Like, if you take the first time it takes you to train to a certain capacity for the first time, and then the time it takes you to retrain that is exponentially shorter, because you've got that motor pattern memory, you've got all kinds of neurological memory. So having accumulated a long period of, you know, training age is super beneficial, and you can kind of lean on that when you've gotten to, you know, a period of your career like I have, where I've put many years in, and now, you know, I can sort of take a break from some of the really hard stuff with the understanding that when the time comes to train for it and do it, it's going to be hard, but I can get back to that point when I need to do it. And I think that that's sometimes the trap, is people coming in that are newer think that they have to make up all this ground. So they're going at it by going really hard all the time, or, you know, I have to max out this lift like every other week or like once a week. And that's not necessarily the way to do it. But it's easier to, from my position, say, oh, of course, it's a long trajectory. You have to take time and build it up over many years, because I'm already after that stage, right? It's a trap for sure. It's a trap that so many people fall into, that, you know, you run into this just like total physiological, psychological burnout when you try to accumulate all that volume or intensity over a shorter period of time. Your body just can't keep up, and inevitably it leads to people either hating what they're trying to do or getting hurt. And unfortunately, it's usually one or the other. And if they manage to survive and spit out the other side, then hopefully that they've reached the goals that they want to do. But it's tough because people are impatient, right? You want to find the fastest or easiest way to get to the goals that you have, and it's hard. Like myself, coming from a gymnastics background, I had no weightlifting or powerlifting skills whatsoever when I started training for CrossFit. And so it was very clear that the way my skill set was, my limits were not, like, my aerobic capacity was great, my skills were great, my strength was terrible, my power output was not great. Like, so I very clearly had to build strength, but like, how do you add 200 pounds to your back squat in, like, you can't do that in a year or in 2 years. Like, you have to just slowly slug it out, and it's frustrating and it's long. But again, that's where I think accountability to a coach or other people and outsourcing that and taking yourself and your own impatience out of the equation is so much better. Because if you just have to follow the instructions and someone else is kind of keeping an eye on those variables and making sure you don't overreach, it's quite simple. It just takes a long time. And I think that's the issue that most people have, is it's frustrating. Like, I've felt that before. I mean, even in my career in gymnastics, I feel like I burnt out of that a little bit. And you can do it with anything. So it's hard. You got to be very mindful of the way you train. That's why things like we're saying the RPE stuff is very useful. That's why stuff like having training partners that are really pushing you can sometimes be bait as well. You got to be able to control that effort so that you're not competing every day. You're still training, because there's a very distinct difference between training and competing. I think you need to be able to allow yourself to, like, learn certain skills and see training, even if it's training your fitness, there's still skills to be developed, and there's still an understanding of movement and an understanding of, like, those perceived efforts that needs to be learned. So there's a lot more that goes into that than just like maximum output all the time. And I think that particularly in our field, like in CrossFit, you get a lot of that where people are, harder is always better, right? And it's like, it's working out. So like if I just work harder, I go as hard as I can every time, that must be the best way, right? But it's not really, right? Like you got to remember that there's so many different energy systems to train. You can take a time to build up your aerobic system and keep your perceived efforts really low, and long high volume, lower intensity training is still very impactful and useful, just in a very different context. So learning to understand all those things can teach you maybe some of that patience, or like I said, if you're more comfortable just outsourcing it, like give your coach the reins and just do what you're told and keep your head out of it. And like I said, I have all the knowledge I need to understand all that stuff, and I still choose to do it that way because I find it just easier for me to remove myself from the equation, trust people fully, and pick the right people for your team, and then just say, my job is to show up and do what you tell me to do, and do it as well as I can do it, execute your plan as fully as I can. And then, we'll discuss how it felt, what it means, what we're doing next time, and give feedback. But yeah, kind of just take myself out of it.
No, that's excellent advice. That was great. So one method I've used successfully with my athletes in the days after competition or a max lift has been neural stimulus training. So the goal isn't metabolic conditioning, but more so to address the neural response. The routine will involve short duration dynamic movements with full recovery, like for example, 8x4 bench hops. Have you tried anything similar?
I not as much, I don't think, with really dynamic stuff. But I mean, I've done similar concepts, like, after we have a high intensity competition or something, the following week is extremely low intensity.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be some volume there, and I would agree, some motor pattern type stuff. So you're still grooving those patterns, and you're using, like, you get all the neurological input you need. And yeah, it's like dynamic movements. I wouldn't say like the same kind of plyometric, maybe. I don't think we've ever emphasized that as much, but I think that that's a lot of what we would do as well, is, reduce the intensity to next to nothing, a very tolerable amount, because you've just overloaded that.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still accumulate some volume. Like I was even saying in the previous topic, like just accumulating a volume at low intensity is still useful. You can create, a little circuit where you're only working every 2 minutes, and you're doing a kind of short burst. And then it's like, all right, lots of rest, lots of reset, and then a short little burst again. And, grooving movement patterns, doing a lot of movement work. Cause you don't want to, you don't want to spend a lot of time just off sitting.
Yeah.
And we do the same thing leading into competition as well. I don't know if you've done the same type of approach. Yeah, because you don't want to go in flat. Like you need those motor patterns ready to fire. So you do the same thing where the for us it's kind of the opposite though. So I guess leading in, your volume would be quite low, but your intensity is still high, and the motor patterns are being recruited and used. And then you compete at pretty high intensity and pretty high volume likely. And then afterwards, now the intensity is really low, but the volume's starting to pick back up again, and those movement patterns are still being used. Because yeah, you don't want to go in flat. You don't want to go in with like this very lazy, I don't know, like your system's not primed, right? So you got to keep yourself ready to go. And then nurture that system again after you really punish it. And I think that, a lot of high impact sports probably use similar approaches.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. In terms of readiness, recent sports psychology strategies are less about stress management and take more of an individualized approach to determine an optimal level of emotional, psychological, and physiological arousal. Have you experimented much in these realms, like deep breathing or using visualizations?
Not much. I wouldn't say I've experimented a lot, at least not in recent years. I think that I was fortunate to develop a lot of those skills at a young age as a gymnast. I think that sport, not uniquely, but is very, very good at developing that kind of an approach, because it's such a high precision sport. And I feel like sports that are very high precision like that, or golf, for example, they really exemplify that sort of bell curve of arousal state where you say, okay, if I'm overexcited, if I'm throwing a triple backflip and I get way too excited and I can't control that energy and I throw 3.5, that's bad.
Mm.
Like more energy isn't always good. And it's likewise, if I really use an under aroused state and I under rotate that flip, it's the same problem. You really need to be able to control and live right in the middle. And so I've in my CrossFit career kind of been accused of being a somewhat of a boring athlete at times, because I don't get the very I do something good and I don't scream and yell and jump up and down, and I'm not like emotionally out there, and I don't ride these highs and lows as a result of it. I'm very steady and controlled, and I'm very good at controlling my emotional state. And usually it's the more beneficial thing. If every time something good happens, you're so elated, and then you have the next thing you do is you throw your everything at it, and then it goes poorly, and then you're weighed down up in the valley, and you have a really hard time picking yourself up for the next event because you're just kind of in the dumps. It's a hard way to compete, and it's a hard way to live in sports, I feel like, or in any context really, to constantly be in this huge state of turmoil and roller coastery. So I kind of learned how to control arousal and at a young age, and fine tune that in years of competition in gymnastics, and now it served me quite well. But like I said, it's less exciting. I'm not the guy that will go hit a new personal best in competition because I'm just like riding the high emotions. But likewise, if I have a bad event, I don't have 2 or 3 in a row because I'm having a hard time finding my footing again. So I think there's a lot to that. And I couldn't really tell you what exactly strategies I use, because it's kind of very natural to me at this point. But I think it's a lot of that, maybe a little bit of mindfulness when you're starting, trying to control your heart rate and control your breathing when you're on a start mat. When the countdowns start, like not letting yourself get so carried away. When you see other athletes doing certain things, not getting too distracted by what other people do. And I think that mostly it's looking in, right? Like you try to just stay into what you're doing, focus on very small steps and very small, cues, to keep yourself doing the things that you need to do to be successful. Because it's like watching other people are getting carried away and swept up in the momentum of any sport or event, can really take you off your game, right? Like what you need to do to be successful. You've trained for it. You've done this and that. So I think in general, looking in is the best way to do it. And yeah, I think that I just sort of at this point it's not that I don't get nervous for stuff either. Like I think every time it's always nerve-wracking, and that's good and that's part of that arousal state, right? Is you get, I wouldn't even say nervous, but like anxious, excited, nervous, excited. And if you didn't feel that way, it's because you don't care about what you're doing, which is bad. So you have to appreciate that, like you should feel that way and it's good, but you have to be able to know what to do with that energy, right? So trying to find ways to calm your breathing, calm yourself down, and convert that energy into whatever you need it to be.
Oh, that's great. So physical skills, training, knowledge don't solely predict success or failure. For example, physiological, psychological responses to challenges often spur someone to success. You exemplified this with your bike crash in the crit in 2018. Did experiences like that make you realize the greater depth of your capacity?
It's kind of funny. Yeah. I don't know. I couldn't tell you again exactly what I was thinking about. I've had a couple of years at the CrossFit Games specifically where the first event of the competition, I took nearly last. I did very poorly, and then came back to finish on the podium overall. And that's sort of something that I think people now associate with me, which is good or bad, I'm not sure. But I think that for one thing, it removes pressure, right? It's one thing about one of the factors that people can feel outside of your own capabilities is pressure of expectations or whatever, whether they're real or imagined. And when having a very poor performance in the first event of the competition, like pressure's off, like you had nowhere to go but up. So I think that to a certain degree, having some poor performances like that set you free a little bit, and allow you to free yourself of those shackles and say, all right, well, now I just one step at a time, we're going to climb this mountain. And then you do. So I think, I don't know if it really makes you appreciate or or experience a new depth of your skills, but I think it sort of frees you from some of those pressures that can stand in your way, right? And I think I've had competitions where, you know, I roll right through it. I'm confident right from the start, and I never lose my footing. And it's amazing to like hit a flow state like that and feel like everything goes great and you can't miss. But it's nice to know that given context where things can go poorly, you have the ability to react to that the way you need to and not shut down and continue to progress and show what you're capable of. And I also think in a sport like mine, where there are multiple events in a series, it sort of lends itself to athletes who are able to do that. If you can turn the page quickly and say, all right, you know, that one's done and that sucks, but I can't dwell on it. Like, we'll figure out what happened. We can have a debrief for like 5 minutes to learn from it, and then that's it, because now I can't let that affect my next performance. This is a fresh event with a fresh amount of points on the line. You know, I think that's a skill set that gets nurtured in that context. So people who, again, gymnastics is the exact same, multiple events in a series. So I think that having the ability to use skills that I developed at a young age and transfer them into a new realm is very helpful. But yeah, I think it kind of helps you. I don't know. I think that's one of those things that is just how do you manage the stress of those situations? And you know, I think you can learn a lot about yourself by how you do. But yeah, I don't know if I really like, I don't know if you find a new depth of your abilities, or if it's just that then you were really able to compete the way you should have from the beginning, because you kind of freed yourself from this like psychological barrier that you had made for yourself, right? And I think that's why sometimes we're our own worst enemies, and the athletes who can compete free of that right from the start are often very successful. And I think that's why high level athletes kind of almost flirt this line of ego, and where you need to believe that you can do it, and you need to think that you can be the best at it, and totally lean into that, because, you know, sometimes those fears self-actualize, and they can be catastrophic. So again, nice to know that you can rebound from it. But yeah, it's interesting that you're right. Those are those components that are outside of physical and things like that can make a big difference in competition.
Oh, that's great. So a motto I have is lift heavy, but live with levity. Do you resonate with that maxim at all?
I would say I could do better at that myself, but I think that it's a great maxim. I wish I could say that that's exactly how I live my life. I should try to live more like that.
That's good. Well, thanks a ton, Pat. That was phenomenal. Is there anything else you want to add, or?
No, I think that's great. Thanks for having me on. It's my pleasure.
No, really, really appreciate it. So if anyone wants any information, they can go to www.athleticwise.com, or, you know, reach out to Pat. He's you know, a really phenomenal athlete, and I think he's exemplified so many phenomenal traits. So thanks again, Pat. It was fantastic.
My pleasure.